I'm extremely pleased that this was organized, because I've read and I've heard about. I'm still struggling to call you Levon. I don't know why. There's more about you and about over the years. So, but anyway, Levon, graciously has agreed to speak. And is this the first time you've ever spoken in London?
Yes.
There you go.
Wow.
So, and of course, Mrs. Chorbajian and Ruby, thank you for arranging this, and thank you for coming. So, without any further delay, we'll speak, we'll listen, we'll have a Q&A. And for those who have been to Hysham before, I'll be happy to give you a quick guided tour upstairs later on. Okay? So,
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. And let's see, I'd like to start by pointing out that if you go to Germany, you will not find an Adolf Hitler University, nor will you find an Hermann Goering International Airport or a Joseph Goebbels Institute of Media Studies. And you won't find them because Germany was a defeated power that acknowledged what it had done during the Second World War, which we mostly know in terms of the killing of millions of Jews, but what the Nazis did was actually much larger than that, and I think we can say that they're responsible for the deaths of 40 to 50 million people during the war. But they've acknowledged this, and what we know as the Holocaust is taught in all German schools, and there are reminders of what happened in statuary and monuments in the country. They even have notices that are built in to sidewalks, and the idea behind that is that these events should never be forgotten. They should be in the consciousness of all Germans, and people should work actively to prevent any recurrence of fascism and similar kinds of extremist political movements on the right. I point this out because this is exactly the opposite of what goes on in Turkey. The genocide has never been acknowledged. It is systematically denied. And there are all kinds of celebrations of people who committed the genocide, who were responsible for it, and have been covering up for decades, right down to the very present. The heads of the CUP, Talat and Enver Pasha and Cemal, are recognized in Turkey, and Ataturk, who continued the genocide in his way, is also, of course, continues to be a national hero down to the present. So the Turkish genocide, in this sense, is very different than what the Nazis did, because it is totally unrecognized. It is totally denied down to the present. And a lot of people think of Turkish denial of the Armenian genocide as something that is fairly recent, but it actually is not recent at all. It started almost immediately, and I'd like to give you some background on that. So we can date the beginning of the genocide to April 1915, about 6 months after Turkey entered the war in late 1914. And France and Britain and Russia, on a Russian initiative, sent a very strongly worded letter to the Sublime Porte, complaining about and condemning, in fact, what was happening to the Armenians. This was almost immediate, and I'll read you what they had to say, or part of what they had to say. For approximately 1 month, the Kurdish and Turkish population of Armenia has acted in collusion, often with the support of the Ottoman authorities, to massacre the Armenians. Such massacres have taken place towards mid-April in Erzurum, Derchun, Begin, Bitlis, Mush, Sasun, Zeytun, and throughout Cilicia. The inhabitants of some 100 villages in the district of Van have all been murdered, and the Armenian quarter is under siege by the Kurds. At the same time, the Ottoman government in Constantinople has dealt severely with a harmless Armenian population. In the face of these new crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilization, the Allied governments are letting the Sublime Porte know publicly that they will hold personally responsible for these crimes all members of the Ottoman government, as well as those of its agents who will be found implicated in similar massacres. It didn't take long for the Turkish authorities to respond to this communication. And what they had to say is interesting because it's very similar to what the Turkish government says today. Over the course of a century, they haven't really budged. There have been individual Turkish intellectuals who acknowledge and have written about the genocide. In fact, Taner Akçam, who is Turkish, is probably right now our most well-known and important Armenian genocide scholar. And there's also a woman, Turkish professor at the University of Michigan, Fatma Mughal-Geçek, who wrote a book talking about the history of Armenian-Turkish relations going back to the late 18th century that she traces down to the present, and she is also a very strong Turkish voice. And there are other people, of course, who are less well known, who have publicly acknowledged the genocide under considerable risk to themselves for taking that position. So I've looked at the Turkish response to the Allied protest letter, and I've broken it down into a number of different categories, and I'd just like to read you some of what they have to say. And this, if you follow the whole issue of Turkish denial of the Armenian genocide, these statements will be familiar to you. So first, they simply lie about it. In their response, they say it is completely false that there have been massacres of Armenians in the empire. And also, the accusations of the governments of the Triple Entente on this subject are nothing but lies. Then there's stonewalling. The Imperial Ottoman government opposes these assertions and allegations contained in the preceding declaration with the most formal denial. And then there's the whole issue of Armenian revolutionaries colluding with the enemy and working to destroy the Ottoman Empire. One example of this is the commanders of the Anglo-French naval forces have begun corresponding with the Armenians in the region of Adana, Dort Yol, Umortalik, Alexandretta, and other areas of the littoral, and have instigated them to revolt. Or, as to the Armenians of Zeytun particularly, it is after this propaganda from the English and French that the Armenian revolutionary organizations went into action at Zeytun since February. The Armenians of the city took up arms against the imperial authorities and surrounded the governor's residence. And then there's the whole issue of very large numbers of Armenian troops deserting the Ottoman armies, crossing over the border, and joining Russian forces to fight against Turkey. Then there are allegations of Armenians massacring Turks in very large numbers. For example, the Russian government has caused the massacre by the Armenians of thousands of peaceful Muslims in the district of Kars, and lets them die pitilessly from hunger or thirst, or being beaten to death with large crosses by the same Armenians who were Ottoman prisoners captured in the Caucasus. And then there are national security arguments where the Turks claim that they had to take action against the Armenians in order to save themselves from this threat to the empire. Quote, in view of these facts, a duty imposed itself on the imperial government, that of suppressing the revolution and of maintaining the public order. Or, the imperial government saw itself, therefore, obliged to resort to military suppression on the one hand, and on the other to arrest the Armenian revolutionaries who were in league with foreign revolutionary committees and the agents of the powers of the Triple Entente. Contrary to the assertions of the three aforementioned governments, the repression by the imperial government took place without the least involvement of any elements of the population. And then there's the case of sidestepping and projection, in which the Turks say, who are the French and the British and the Russians to complain about us in light of what they've done in Egypt and in sub-Saharan Africa and India and in Central Asia, that they have no right to say that we're doing anything that is unacceptable. And if you read the denialist literature today, promoted by pro-Turkish writers, including American professors like Justin McCarthy, you run across these arguments repeatedly. They're very familiar to anybody who has followed this sort of thing. I think that it's important to look at Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide in his 1944 book. I'm looking for this here. Oh yeah, okay, here it is. Axis Power in Occupied Europe. And Lemkin was a Polish Jew who lost just about his entire family to the Nazis. He was able to flee the country into Scandinavia and eventually made his way to the United States, where he became a professor of law at Yale University, which is located close to New York City. And Lemkin devoted the rest of his life to having genocide outlawed as an international crime, which the United Nations eventually did do in 1948. The role of the United States in all of this is kind of murky, because even though Lemkin by then was an American citizen, and he was aided by certain Americans, including the widow of President Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a very important human rights activist in her own right. The United States was one of the last countries in the world to actually ratify the Genocide Convention. That was not until the mid-1980s. But Lemkin's conception of genocide was much broader than what made its way into the United Nations Convention, because there were a lot of politics involved and a lot of debate and controversy and opposition to Lemkin's very broad vision, which I'm going to read to you in a minute. It is codified under international law. That is an important development, despite the shortcomings of the UN Convention. And the very important one is that it excludes people who are murdered because of political beliefs. And this was because of a strong opposition from the Soviet Union. Okay, so what did Lemkin write in his book? He wrote, by genocide we mean the destruction of an ethnic group. Generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all members of the nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. The objectives of such a plan would be disintegration of the political and social institutions of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and the economic existence of national groups, and the destruction of the personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of individuals belonging to such groups. And this is important because this is what Turkey has done since its inception in October of 1923. And the new country of Turkey promotes a myth, and the myth is that it represented a break from the old Ottoman Empire. And they point to certain things that they did in fact change. They outlawed the caliphate, they abolished the sultanate, they altered their language so that there was a period of time where new generations of Turks had difficulty understanding the language that was spoken, especially by their grandparents. They adopted a Western alphabet. They destroyed thousands and thousands of books that talked about the history of the Ottoman Empire. And in so doing, the nature of that empire was made unavailable to future generations of Turks. And what would those history books have taught people? Those history books would have taught people that, and I don't want to romanticize the Ottoman Empire by any means, but it was a multinational empire. Many people lived in it. They spoke many different languages. They practiced different religions. And while it's true that the government never treated non-Turks as equals, Armenians and other groups were always inferior. They were discriminated against, but they ran a lot of the internal aspects of their communities. And the Turkish state was based on a very different principle, which was that it would be a country of Turks. This is a position that the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, which carried out the genocide, adopted, even though they had alliances with Armenian groups, especially the Tashnaks. But in the end, they took the route of extermination, and they were very much committed to making Turkey a Turkish country. The mistake that the Kurds made was, and who participated in the genocide, many of them, was that they thought that the problem with the Armenians was that they were not Muslims. And as Muslims, the Kurds concluded that they were safe. And the error that they made is that they weren't Turks. And so in the 1920s and 30s, Turkey turned on the Kurds, tried to engage in forced assimilation policies, which they rebelled against. And there were clashes and massacres of Kurds in which at least 200,000, maybe 300,000 Kurds were killed. And this is a contradiction within Turkish society that comes down to the present, and it occasionally results in violence and armed clashes. What I'd like to talk about is and this is based on Lemkin's original conception of genocide, that what the Turkish state has been engaged in is actually not only the physical eradication of Armenians, but the actual eradication of the very memory of Armenians. I'll tell you a little anecdote. Recently, maybe 6 months ago, I was in Toronto, where an institute you may have heard of, the Sourian Institute for Contemporary Armenian Research and Documentation, is based primarily. And I've been just about a charter member since its inception in the early 1980s. And we had a board meeting in which various members of the academic and also financial board of the Institute, we had 2 days of meetings. And we had a banquet one of the evenings where we invited major donors to come and meet members of the board in recognition of their contributions to the Institute. And so I was sitting at a table with 2 other people, and then 2 couples who had been invited to this event. They were from Istanbul. They were in their 50s, and I noticed that they were consistently speaking Turkish with one another. And I asked the the woman about this, and she said, "Oh, yes, well, you know, if the Turks can tell that you're not a native Turk like them, they persecute you, they harass you, and I don't know how they can tell," she told me, "but they're very exact in picking you out if you make any errors in the way that you speak Turkish." So from the point that you're a child, it's emphasized by your parents and your larger community of people that it's very important to speak excellent Turkish. And this is what we all strive to do, she said. So we speak Armenian, but it's not really very good Armenian, and our primary language is Turkish. So what's going on here? I mean, it's exactly what Lemkin is talking about, that people's identity is being attacked and it is being undermined, and the eventual goal is destruction. And there are other, of course, manifestations of this. In Turkey, if you look at public monuments and statuary, you look at textbooks that students learn Turkish history from. This whole period is of the teens in the 1920s and the formation of the Turkish Republic is completely romanticized. When Armenians are dealt with, they're dealt with as a disloyal, treasonous minority that the state had to take action against in order to save itself from disloyal subjects. And this is what Turks learn. I've talked to Taner Akçam, who is the Turkish scholar based in the US, who I referred to earlier. And I read Fatma Gerçek's book, and both of them explain that they're Turkish, they were born in Turkey, they were raised in Turkey, they're educated in Turkey, and they knew nothing about the Armenian Genocide until they were adults. It was never talked about, never referred to in school, never appeared in the media, and it was a completely non-existent reality. Gerçek describes being a first-year graduate student at Princeton University, coming straight from Turkey, and they're having some kind of gathering in the student lounge where the new students are meeting with faculty and introducing themselves to one another. And she's attacked by an Armenian American who finds out that she's Turkish and demands to know why you murdered my grandparents. And her response is, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know anything about this. And she says that it was a complete shock. And her parents were, she says, were very liberal people. They never had anything negative to say about any ethnic group that is living in Turkey. They were not prejudiced in any way, but this is a reality that was completely concealed. And she asked about it, and she discovered that yes, in fact, these things had happened. But there was nothing in the public life or the institutional structure of the society that allowed the average Turk to learn about this. So it's concealed, and I think that when some Turks are, when the issue is raised with them and they say they know nothing about it, that in many cases this is in fact sincere, although I wouldn't say certainly. This is a book that was published in Yerevan last year. It's called Another Genocide After the Genocide. And it's a book about architecture, because at the beginning of the genocide, they estimate, the authors estimate, that there were over 150,000 Armenian monuments in Turkey. Cemeteries, churches, chapels, kochkars, different things that were created, built, and maintained by Armenians in Turkey. And one of the things that the Turks have done is that they have variously allowed these things to deteriorate. They've looted them for building materials. They have converted them into jails, schools, mosques, community centers, in some cases granaries and stables, prisons even. Or they've used them as targets in artillery practice by the military and whatnot. So I just thought that these pictures were quite poignant, and I have a cathedral, an Armenian cathedral in Kars, which is in the northeast, not too far from the Armenian border. And in fact, the city of Kars and adjacent districts were part of the First Armenian Republic, but the republic, as you may know, was invaded by Turkish forces, and that section of the First Armenian Republic was lost to Turkey. So this is the main Armenian church and cathedral, and on the next page, we see this pile of rubble, which is all that remains of it. It's been completely demolished. Some kids are playing on these construction stones, and it no longer exists. So not only are the people gone, but their religious institution in this community is completely destroyed. And this is pretty typical. These are the doors to the cathedral, and they're very large wooden doors. These were not destroyed. They were saved, and they are on display in the Kars Municipal Museum. And you can see here that there are Armenian crosses carved into both doors. But while the doors survive, the crosses don't. They've been eliminated, and any remnant of any kind of Christian or Armenian connection is no longer there. So when Turks or tourists come into the museum, they have no way of knowing that any of this is connected to the Armenian people. So here we have two stones that on the bottom that also have Armenian crosses on them. And these have been saved, but they make up the foundation of these people's home. So this either comes from a cemetery, or it comes from a church, or some other structure constructed by Armenians, and now it's used for some entirely different purpose, almost as a mockery of the people who created it. I was wondering why the stones wouldn't be turned backwards so the crosses wouldn't be visible to people. You know, I speculated that the placement where they are visible is actually a conscious decision, where you know, this is all you people have left, and it's almost you know, laughing at the people who originally created all of this. I think a struggle on our hands. In Britain and the United States, these are two of the countries that have never recognized the Armenian Genocide. I don't know what kinds of attempts are being made here in Britain to get the British government to recognize the genocide. I assume it's not going very well because they haven't done it. And in the United States, there's tremendous opposition to all of this. The Turks spend a lot of money courting politicians, and also creating a body of falsehoods about what went on.